Get comfortable, turn the volume up a bit, and listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you started as a dream and ended up becoming a nightmare that changed my life forever. But before I go on, I'm going to ask you for something very simple. Write right now in the comments which country or city you're listening to this story from. And if you haven't already, please leave a like and subscribe so the channel can keep growing. The drive to our new house felt like something out of a dream. For hours, the car my husband David was driving left the wide city asphalt behind, venturing onto a road that grew narrower and more winding, surrounded by trees. The tall buildings were far behind us, as if they belonged to another life, and the air that drifted in through the cracked open window was cooler, cleaner, almost sweet. David couldn't stop talking, excitedly painting a picture with his words of the house he'd promised me. His masterpiece, a private paradise he had prepared just for me, for us. Our new beginning, he would say over and over, squeezing my hand every now and then with that perfect smile that had made me fall so in love with him. I would smile back, trying to catch some of his enthusiasm. Part of me was genuinely happy. I was tired of the constant noise, the traffic, the job, the monotonous life in a tiny apartment. The idea of a house surrounded by nature, far from the chaos, sounded almost miraculous. But another part of me, a small, stubborn part, felt a strange knot in my stomach. That remoteness wasn't just peace. It was isolation. The feeling that we were moving away from everything and everyone was so intense that at times I struggled to breathe. When we finally arrived, I was speechless. The house stood in the middle of a wide clearing, surrounded by a forest of tall pines that seemed to touch the sky. The architecture was ultra-modern, with massive glass walls and clean dark lines. There was something hypnotic about it, as if it were perfectly integrated into the landscape while simultaneously defying it with arrogance. It was beautiful, and somehow intimidating. "What do you think, my love? Do you like it?" David asked, his eyes shining with pride. I could only nod, still too overwhelmed to form a coherent response. He opened the car door for me with exaggerated gallantry and took my hand to lead me inside. Inside, the house was even more impressive. The living room was a huge, open space with minimalist, elegant furniture, perfectly arranged as if part of an exhibition. An entire wall of glass offered a panoramic view of the pine forest, so close it seemed the trees were part of the room's decor. Everything smelled new, of freshly treated wood, of expensive technology. David showed me every corner, explaining in lavish detail the smart lighting system, the climate control, the voice commands, the hidden sensors. He knew where every switch was, how every appliance worked, as if he'd been living there for years. I was impressed by his command of the house, but it also struck me as odd. The house was supposed to be new, something we would break in together. Still, I let it go. We spent that afternoon unpacking some things from the boxes, filling that overly perfect space a little with our belongings. Our laughter echoed in the empty rooms, bouncing off the walls as if the house didn't yet know how to sound like a home. As evening fell, David prepared a romantic dinner. He cooked my favorite dishes, uncorked a bottle of expensive wine, and set the table by the picture window, where we could watch the forest slowly fade into bluish shadows. "To our new beginning," he said, raising his glass. I smiled. We clinked our glasses, and we drank. That night, David was the ideal husband, attentive, loving, funny, almost perfect. He assured me again and again that everything would be fine, that the solitude of the place was a blessing, not a curse. "Here we can focus only on us," he would say, "without nosy neighbors, without bosses calling, without meddling friends, without family weighing in on everything. Just you and me." When he said, "without family," he looked at me intently, as if searching for a reaction. I felt a chill I couldn't explain, but I pushed it out of my mind. He was my husband, the man who had been by my side for years, who had planned all of this for us. I had to trust him. As we were clearing the table, something caught my eye. On one of the large wooden beams that crossed the ceiling, I saw a small engraving, so fine it could have been mistaken for the wood grain if I hadn't looked closely. I approached it with curiosity. It was a strange symbol, a kind of stylized eye from which a spiral emerged, coiling inward. It wasn't a normal decorative element. It didn't fit with the modern style of the house. "David, what's this?" I asked, pointing to the beam. He looked up, saw it, and let out a short chuckle. "Oh, that? Who knows? Maybe some bored carpenter decided to leave his mark. You know, old houses always have their quirks. Don't worry about it, love." I frowned. I could have sworn he had told me 1,000 times that the house was built from scratch, that it wasn't a renovation of an old structure. This contradicted his own story. But the dinner had been so lovely, and I was so tired that I just nodded and decided not to press the issue. I filed the symbol away in a corner of my memory as a curious, unexplained detail. After dinner, we sat on the sofa in front of the large window. The forest was now a wall of darkness broken by small, distant lights that could have been very isolated houses, or perhaps vehicles on a lost highway. We snuggled up, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that I was safe, that all this isolation was truly an opportunity to start over. Then David's phone rang. He jumped up, looked at the screen, and his expression changed instantly. He walked a few steps away before answering. His voice, which always sounded confident and controlled, became tense, professional, cold. The call didn't last long, but when he returned, his face was serious. "Lucy, I am so sorry," he said, sitting beside me and taking my hands. "An emergency has come up at the office, a crucial client from overseas. They say if I don't handle it tonight, a multi-million-dollar contract could fall through. I can't postpone it." I felt disappointment rise in my throat. It was our first night in the new house, the first night of this supposed new beginning, and he was going to leave me alone. "Now?" I whispered. He hugged me immediately, as if he had anticipated my reaction. "I swear I won't be long. I'll go and come back as fast as I can. It'll only be a few hours. In the meantime, rest. Take a hot shower, explore the house at your own pace. Think of it as having this whole place to yourself for a little while," he joked, trying to ease the tension. He gave me a long kiss on the forehead, one of those kisses that used to calm me down. He put on his jacket, grabbed the car keys, and walked me to the front door. "Lock all the doors and don't open for anyone. Anyone. Until I get back," he insisted, looking me in the eyes. I nodded. I watched him get in the car and disappear down the path among the pines. When his taillights vanished, a heavy blanket of silence fell over the house. The place that had felt warm and full of life just minutes before became enormous, hollow, too quiet. I locked the door, just as he had asked, and returned to the living room. The silence was so absolute I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood there, not sure what to do, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was overreacting, that it was just the feeling of a first night in an unfamiliar place. Then I heard it. At first, it was just a very soft vibration, a deep hum, so low it almost seemed imaginary. It wasn't coming from any specific point. It seemed to seep from the walls themselves, from the ceiling, from the floor. I walked around the living room trying to find its source, but the more I moved, the more I felt that the sound was everywhere and nowhere. And it wasn't just the sound. A light, sweetish aroma began to float in the air. A faint smell, of something burning, but not unpleasant. It reminded me of the smoke from incense or resin burning somewhere far away. I checked the kitchen, the outlets, the fireplace, thinking of a short circuit, some malfunctioning appliance. Everything was in order. The windows were shut tight. Where was that smell coming from? Discomfort stirred within me, slowly turning into unease. I decided to distract myself and went upstairs to put away some clothes in the master bedroom. The room was huge, with a large bed covered in pristine white sheets and another glass wall overlooking the forest. As I folded t-shirts and hung dresses in the closet, the humming returned, sometimes stronger, sometimes barely perceptible, as if it were breathing. The smell also came back in gusts, intensifying for a few seconds and then disappearing. In an attempt to feel safer, I turned on all the lights in the house. I went through every room, flipping switches, illuminating hallways, bathrooms, corners I hadn't seen yet. The house was too perfect, too clean. There wasn't a speck of dust, not a mark on the floor, not a trace of wear. It didn't look like a place where anyone had ever lived. It looked like a stage, a set carefully prepared for a play that hadn't begun yet. I looked for my phone and checked if I finally had a signal to text David. Nothing. Not a single bar, not even enough to send a simple text message. The house was literally cut off from the world. I told myself it was normal, that maybe later or in another spot on the property there would be reception, but the feeling of being trapped in a hermetic bubble grew stronger. David's words about focusing only on us began to sound different in my head, as if they were hiding something. I went to the dining room window and looked outside, seeking a distraction. Then I saw it. Among the pines, at some distance, a small yellow light was visible. I squinted. There was a small building, a humble wooden shack with a narrow porch. In front of it, a metal cart with a grill. I remembered seeing it out of the corner of my eye when we arrived that afternoon, but I was too preoccupied with the house to pay it any attention. Now, however, I couldn't look away. A middle-aged man was cleaning the cart with mechanical movements. The bare bulb hanging above him cast deep shadows on his tired face. I watched him for a few moments. There was something odd about his demeanor. He would stop for moments at a time, cease his scrubbing, straighten his back, and stare intently at our house with an expression that wasn't curiosity, but concern, almost fear. I wanted to be polite. I slid the glass door open a little, raised my hand, and waved. When he realized I was looking at him, he flinched as if he'd been caught doing something forbidden. His face turned pale. He didn't return the wave. On the contrary, he clumsily gathered the cart, pushed it inside the small establishment, and slammed the door shut. That exaggerated reaction sent a shiver down my spine. What was it about our house that provoked such fear in him? Or what was it about me? I went back inside with an uncomfortable tightness in my chest. I tried to convince myself that he was just a grumpy neighbor, an unsociable person who didn't want trouble. As I heated water for some tea, I glanced back at his shack. This time, I saw him moving in the dim light, going to each corner, bending down as if he were sprinkling something on the floor. His movements were slow, repetitive, almost ritualistic. It made no sense, but I got the feeling he was drawing an invisible circle around his own home. The night wore on, and David didn't return. I, out of sheer necessity, started sending messages despite having no signal, as if the simple act of writing and hitting send could calm my anxiety. The silence of the house became oppressive. The humming in the walls seemed louder. Every rustle from the forest made me turn my head, imagining hidden figures among the trees. The smell of incense returned in waves, sometimes so strong I felt it catching in my throat. I took refuge on the sofa, hugging a cushion, trying not to fall apart. Just as tears were beginning to well up in my eyes, something happened that completely shattered my fragile sense of control. A sharp crack, and then total darkness. I screamed, unable to stop myself. All the lights went out at the same time. The humming disappeared instantly, replaced by a silence that was even denser, almost aggressive. The shadows swallowed every corner of the house. My trembling hands fumbled for my phone on the coffee table. I turned on the flashlight, and a small circle of white light appeared in the midst of the blackness. It was ridiculously weak compared to the size of the house, but it was all I had. My heart was beating so fast my chest hurt. I thought about the fuse box, about the possibility of going down to the basement, but the idea of venturing alone into dark hallways and stairs paralyzed me. I was debating whether to stay huddled there or try to get out when another sound broke the silence. One that froze my blood. Knocks. Someone was pounding on the front door with desperate force. The knocks were rapid, insistent, almost frantic, accompanied by the sound of ragged breathing. I stood motionless, unable to move a muscle. David wouldn't knock like that, I thought. He had a key. No normal neighbor pounds on a door that way at this hour. Gathering what little courage I had left, I groped my way down the hall to the front door. Luckily, the digital peephole ran on an internal battery, so the screen lit up as soon as I activated it. What I saw on it sent a chill down my spine. On the monitor was the sweaty, distraught face of the man from the food stand. His skin was pale, his shirt stuck to his body, his eyes wide with terror. He was looking around like a cornered animal. I gently undid the security chain, leaving just a crack. "Sir?" I stammered. "What's wrong?" As soon as he noticed the door give a little, he pressed his face to the opening. His breath smelled of smoke and fear. "Quick," he whispered hoarsely. "Quick, ma'am, get out of this house before your husband comes back. There's no time. Come with me. I have to show you something." His words hung in the cold air, impossible to fit into any logic. My entire body screamed no, that locking the door and taking refuge was the sensible thing to do. David always told me to be wary of strangers, that people could be dangerous. But there was a panic in that man's eyes so authentic, so raw, that something inside me recognized it as truth. It was the same panic that was beginning to grow in my own chest. I didn't have time to make a plan. The memory of the symbol carved into the beam, the humming in the walls, the smell of incense, the distance from the city, the frightened eyes of that man watching us from his stand. It all clicked together in my mind like pieces of a cruel puzzle. I felt that if I stayed, something terrible would happen, something from which there would be no return. Without thinking too much, I unlocked the deadbolts and stepped outside, wearing only my thin pajamas and a pair of light slippers. The man, who I later learned was named Thomas, grabbed my arm firmly but gently. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. "Stay low. We'll walk on the grass, not the path. And whatever you do, don't look back." I obeyed. The grass was cold and damp under my feet. The night air pricked my skin like needles. We walked close to the side of the house, staying off the main path to avoid the gravel that could give us away. The pines rose around us like black columns. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was a silence that held something, like a bated breath. The distance between the house and Thomas's small stand couldn't have been great, maybe 50 yards, but that night it felt eternal. Every crunch of a branch under our feet made me hold my breath. More than once, I nearly slipped. He held me steady and kept moving forward with quick steps, barely looking back. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but turn my head. The house was silhouetted in the distance, a dark block against the sky. A black block with no lights, no life, but with an overwhelming presence. We reached the small food stand. Thomas opened the back door with an old key that squeaked, and a thick smell of charcoal, spices, and oil spilled out. Inside, he left everything in darkness. Only the faint glow of embers remaining in the stove illuminated the interior with a reddish light. "Upstairs," he instructed in a low voice. "Quick." We climbed a narrow wooden staircase to a small room on the upper floor. There was only a mattress on the floor, an old wardrobe, and a small window that looked directly towards my house. Thomas went to the window, lifted the curtain slightly, and stared outside for a few tense seconds. Then he turned to me. "Don't be scared by what you're about to see." "Yes," he said slowly, "but you have to see it with your own eyes." He stood on a chair, opened the top of the wardrobe, and pulled out something large and heavy. a pair of old metal binoculars. He placed them in my hands. They were cold and heavier than they looked. "Look towards your house," he whispered. "Focus on the living room." With my heart pounding against my ribs, I brought the binoculars to my eyes and searched for the silhouette of the house. It took me a few seconds to focus. At first, everything was a blur of shadows. I turned the central wheel, taking deep breaths so my hands wouldn't shake so much. And then the image became clear. My breath caught in my throat. The house wasn't dark. The living room, the kitchen, the hallways, everything was lit up as if it were noon. The lamps shone with an intense white light. There had been no power outage. The darkness had been just for me. And in the middle of the living room was David. He was not the smiling, affectionate husband who had served me dinner just hours before. His face was now a cold, calculating mask. He was wearing a perfect dark suit, different from the one he had on when he left, and he was surrounded by several people dressed in black with tactical vests, moving with almost military precision. Some were placing small devices in the corners. Others were checking the furniture, cleaning the table where we had eaten minutes before, erasing any trace of my presence. They didn't speak to each other. They communicated with gestures, like a highly trained team. My body began to tremble. I wanted to put the binoculars down, to refuse to keep watching, but something stronger than fear compelled me to continue. David then approached a seemingly normal wall, the one where an abstract painting hung. He pressed something on the frame, and without a sound, a panel slid to one side. Behind it was a hidden room enclosed by thick glass. Inside were several rows of leather armchairs, all facing the living room, like a small private observation room, a kind of theater with my house as the stage. I felt nauseous. And then I saw the final detail, the one that broke something inside me. David raised his hand. On his finger was a silver ring I had never seen before. Engraved delicately on the metal was the same symbol I had seen on the beam, an eye and a spiral. He looked at it for a second, almost with devotion. Then he turned towards the window facing the forest and raised his hand in a sort of greeting or bow, as if toasting something invisible hidden among the trees. A solemn, ritualistic gesture. The binoculars slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. My legs gave out. I sank to my knees, placing my hands on the wooden floor. I felt the world spinning. The man I had married, the one who had promised me a home, had built a trap, and I was at its center. Thomas knelt beside me and handed me a glass of water. His hands were calloused, but they were firm and surprisingly steady. I took small sips, my throat dry. "Who is he?" I finally managed to murmur, my voice broken. "Who is my husband, really?" Thomas sighed. He sat in front of me with his legs crossed, his face etched with deep wrinkles. The reddish light coming up from the floor below gave him the look of a figure carved from wood. "I don't know his real name," he replied. "People like him use many names. What I do know is that he doesn't work for a simple luxury real estate company, and this house is not just a house." He then told me the story his family had been whispering for generations. His ancestors had lived on this land long before anyone dreamed of modern homes and property developments. They said that centuries ago, on this very spot, a dark cult had operated, a sect that worshipped a nameless thing that symbolically resided in the forest. It was not a good or kind deity. It was a hungry presence. "My grandparents always said the same thing," Thomas recalled. "Never leave this land, but never trust what is built upon it. Your job is to watch." Over time, a company called Serene Vistas Development began buying up the entire area. They paid figures that were impossible to refuse, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, and people sold their land and left without looking back. Only Thomas's family refused to sell. They were left cornered with their small house and food stand, surrounded by empty properties destined to become an exclusive complex. "They thought Serene Vistas just wanted to build mansions for the rich," he said. But some of us knew that wasn't it. They were a front for something much older. According to what he had been told and what he had discovered himself, that ancient sect had not disappeared. It had only modernized. Its members were no longer fanatical peasants but millionaires, high-ranking officials, judges, corporate executives. They still believed that by feeding on the fear and desperation of their victims on this specific land, they would receive power, fortune, longevity. The symbol you saw on the beam, Thomas added, is their mark. The all-seeing eye, the spiral of fear that tightens to the center. I swallowed hard. He told me about another family who, a few years earlier, had moved into a house on this very site. A man, a woman, and their 2 young children, full of excitement just like us. Thomas had tried to warn them with anonymous notes, with subtle signs, but they complained to the complex's security. They reported him as a crazy old man trying to scare them. Until one night, several high-end cars arrived. The house lit up just like now. He hid in this very room and, with these same binoculars, saw things he didn't want to describe in detail. The next morning, the house was empty. Days later, the bulldozers came, tore it down, and sometime later, they built another one, mine. The ones in charge of all this call it the hunt, he whispered. They watch from those leather armchairs behind the glass while a chosen victim is pushed to the brink. And this time, Lucy, the chosen one, is you. His words pierced me like a knife. Suddenly, my whole life took on a twisted meaning. I had been an orphan since I was a teenager. My closest relatives lived far away and we barely spoke. My friends knew I was moving to an area with no cell service. If I disappeared for a few days, they would attribute it to work, stress, a bad signal. I had no children or parents calling me every hour. I was the perfect target for them. And David, all his love, all his effort, his patience, his thoughtful gestures, our entire relationship, had actually been a selection process. The air in the room grew colder. "We have to get out of here," I finally said, my voice trembling. "Right now." Thomas nodded, but his expression hardened. "Leaving isn't that easy. The entire perimeter is surrounded by an electrified fence several meters high. They have motion sensors, hidden cameras. The main road and the entrance where your car came in will be watched by now. If we try to leave that way, they'll spot us immediately." "Then what?" I asked desperately. "There's one chance," he replied, looking towards the densest part of the forest. "At the end of the valley, there's a small river with slippery rocks and a strong current. It's outside the direct perimeter. It's hard to get to. The terrain is treacherous, and maybe that's why they haven't filled that area with sensors. If we survive tonight, it will be by that path." The idea of plunging into the forest in the middle of the night, not knowing the terrain, pursued by armed men, seemed almost insane. But the alternative was to stay in that house as prey in a hunt, and that was no longer an option. "I need some clothes and shoes," I said, looking down at my thin pajamas. Thomas immediately stood up, opened the wardrobe, and pulled out a thick jacket and a pair of old rubber boots, much larger than my size. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing," he said. I put them on as best I could. Just as I was adjusting one of the boots, a powerful hum vibrated from outside, different from the one I had heard inside the house. Then came several sharp, metallic clicks. We approached the window. Giant floodlights mounted on the roof of my house switched on, bathing the exterior in a blinding white light. The beams of light swept across the ground, searching for something, searching for us. "He's realized you're not inside," Thomas murmured. "The game has started ahead of schedule." I felt a tingling in the jacket pocket. I pulled out my phone. To my surprise, I had a signal. A single, weak bar, but enough to receive a message. On the screen was David's name. With trembling hands, I opened the conversation. There was a single new text. "Honey, where are you? Don't play hide and seek. The game hasn't started yet." I felt my blood run cold. The signal hadn't returned by chance. He controlled it. He had denied it to me all afternoon, and now gave it to me just so I would know he was watching me, that he was enjoying my fear. I looked up, gasping for air, and placed my hand on the trunk of a large pine tree next to Thomas's shack. As I did, I felt a strange roughness under my fingers. I brought the phone's flashlight closer. Carved into the bark, deep and unmistakable, was the same eye with the spiral. Not only the house was marked, the entire forest was an altar. I collapsed onto the grass, broken by a mixture of terror and despair. "He knows everything," I whispered. "He knows every move. This isn't an escape. It's part of the show." For the first time, I saw a shadow of doubt in Thomas's eyes, but he brushed it aside with an abrupt gesture and grabbed my shoulders firmly. "Don't give him what he wants," he said forcefully. "Your fear is his sustenance. If you give up, he's already won. We're going to try. Do you hear me? Even if it's crazy." His desperate but brave words managed to ground me in reality. I stood up. I couldn't change the fact that I had been chosen as prey, but maybe I could still choose how to react. We slipped out the back door of the stand, crouching, moving between the tree trunks to stay out of the direct reach of the floodlights. Every time a beam of light came near, we dropped to the ground, pressing ourselves against the damp earth, waiting for it to pass. The forest was alive with creaks, chirps of insects, leaves rustling in the wind. Any sound could be a branch or a footstep. After several minutes of moving almost blindly, panting with sore legs, Thomas pointed to a dark structure among the trees. It was a small brick building, blackened by time, almost swallowed by vegetation. An old generator room, abandoned for decades, he explained in a whisper. "If there's one place his cameras can't see," he added, "it's here." The metal door was rusted but not locked. Thomas pushed it open slowly. The screech made us flinch, but no one seemed to have heard it. We went inside and closed it behind us. It smelled of old oil, dampness, and dust. A huge generator, covered in rust, occupied the center. The electrical panels, with old switches and dangling wires, looked like the remains of a prehistoric animal. For the first time in hours, I felt a slight relief. The thick walls insulated us from the sounds of the forest and the light of the floodlights. Inside, at least for a few minutes, we could breathe. We sat on the floor, exhausted. As I tried to catch my breath, something caught my eye. In a corner, some of the floorboards looked newer, as if someone had recently lifted them and then put them back without much care. I went over, driven by a strange curiosity, and carefully pulled one of them up. It lifted easily. Underneath was a small space, and in that space, a watertight metal box, the size of a shoebox. My heart started pounding again. This wasn't Thomas's. Someone had hidden it there, perhaps many years ago. "What is that?" he asked, coming closer. "I don't know," I replied, "but I think we're about to find out." I opened the box. Inside, carefully wrapped in a faded blue cloth, were personal items that made my stomach clench. A man's watch with a broken crystal, its hands stopped at 2:17. A silver heart-shaped locket with a miniature photo of a smiling young couple. A small teddy bear with one eye torn out. Several wallets with ID cards of different people of various ages. It was like a cemetery of stolen memories. Underneath it all, at the bottom, was a leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges. I opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was neat at first, but became faster, messier, more anxious in the last pages. The author's name was Arthur, a historian. I recognized his last name. He was the father of the family Thomas had told me about. In the first entries, he wrote about the excitement of moving into the new house, the smell of freshly cut wood, the joy of watching his children run through the living room. But as I turned the pages, the tone changed. He began to mention unexplainable noises, shadows in the forest, the constant feeling of being watched. He found the symbol of the eye with the spiral in different corners, on beams, on tree trunks, on stones. As a historian, he had investigated. He searched for the symbol in archives, in local legends, in ancient documents. What he discovered filled him with horror. He wrote of a very old cult that believed human fear, when concentrated in a specific place, acted as an offering to something they did not understand. The more intense and prolonged the terror, the more blessings they believed their followers would receive. I flipped to the end. The last entry was almost illegible, written with erratic strokes, as if the hand holding the pen had been trembling. I read aloud, "They don't just kill, they believe they're harvesting fear. There is something older in this land, something that feeds on that harvest. This house is not a home. It's a funnel, an instrument to concentrate terror. Oh God, they're coming for my children." After that sentence, there were only meaningless scribbles, as if someone had been interrupted mid-thought. I slammed the notebook shut, as if by doing so I could silence the voices of the dead. There, in that suffocating room, I finally understood the magnitude of what we were facing. It wasn't just a group of rich killers looking for a thrill. These were people convinced they were feeding something more, protected by a sophisticated system of power and silence. And that night, the main course of their banquet had my name on it. But alongside the fear, something else began to grow inside me. A cold, pure, almost luminous rage. A part of me refused to remain a victim, to become just another truncated entry in a diary hidden under the floor. "If what they want is fear," I muttered, "we're not going to give it to them." Thomas looked at me, surprised. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to spend the rest of the night running like an animal until I die of exhaustion in the woods," I replied, feeling my voice harden. "If we manage to escape, they'll find another woman, another family. This doesn't end. The only way to stop this is to burn it to the ground." I looked back inside the box. On one side, partially hidden by the cloth, was a black nylon case. I took it out. Inside was an old, rugged laptop, almost military grade, and several strange cables and devices that I recognized immediately. I had worked in the IT world years ago, before I met David. This case belonged to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A security specialist, a hacker, perhaps someone who had been forced to design the house's network. "This laptop doesn't belong to just any guest," I said. "It's from someone who understood networks, encryption, vulnerabilities. And if he hid it here, it's because he was planning to do something he may not have finished." I opened it. The system asked for a password. A piece of yellow tape was stuck to the bottom. On it, handwritten, was a riddle. Name of my first queen in my favorite game, reversed. Trying passwords under pressure is one of the worst feelings in the world. My mind filled with possibilities. Names of characters from video games, fantasy novels, TV shows. I combined letters, typing and deleting, accumulating errors. Each failed attempt made a cold sweat run down my back. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think like the person who wrote that note. Someone confident enough to hide the equipment under floorboards, but paranoid enough to disguise a simple key. Perhaps the trick was in the reversed part itself. Maybe the answer was much simpler. Then a name came to me, a classic, almost obvious one. I typed it in lowercase. Without reversing it, I hit enter. The screen flickered. The desktop appeared. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "It was right in front of you the whole time," I muttered, a mix of frustration and admiration for the stranger who had set up this equipment. On the desktop were several folders. One in particular made my blood run cold. Network Beachy Map. I opened it. Inside were detailed schematics of David's house's security system, cameras, sensors, electronic locks, lighting and audio control, internal communications, even diagrams of potential automated traps. Most importantly, the author of the file had left notes in the margins, pointing out several back doors he had secretly installed, probably as an insurance policy in case his employers turned on him. In a matter of minutes, I was back to being the Lucy from before David, the analyst, the one who saw patterns where others only saw wires. My fingers danced across the keyboard, following the clues that this stranger had left for someone like me. It didn't take long to gain administrative access to a large part of the system. A strange energy took hold of me. Right there, sitting amidst the dust and the smell of old oil, I realized that if David thought he was a god in his smart palace, I had just become a ghost in his machine. The first thing I did was locate the perimeter cameras, especially those monitoring the more remote areas of the forest. I chose a few, the ones far from the river and the old generator room, and programmed a 5-minute video loop. To anyone watching from the control room, these sectors would appear calm, still, with nothing to report, even as we were passing through them. "We have to go back to the house," I said, looking at Thomas. His eyes widened. "Go back? Are you crazy?" "The central server is in the basement, under the kitchen," I explained. "From here I can touch a lot of things, but if I want to take full control and, more importantly, get this out to the world, I need a more direct connection. This isn't just about escaping, Thomas. It's about exposing them. If tonight is recorded as just another isolated disappearance, there will be more. If the world sees who they are, their game is over." Thomas hesitated. He was scared, and for good reason. But he also knew he had been watching helplessly for years, seeing others fall into the trap without being able to save them. Perhaps this was the first time he had an ally on the inside. He finally nodded with brave resignation. We left the generator room and re-entered the forest. I carried the open laptop, the screen's light dim, just enough to see the camera icons. Every few yards we stopped. I checked their positions. Diverted guards sent to empty sectors by activating sounds of breaking branches, small lights programmed from a distance. I began to use the system against them. A guard would turn on a flashlight in one area. I would trigger a sound in another, making him go where we wanted him to. Slowly, we approached the back of the house. According to the network map, there was a service ventilation grate hidden under some bushes. Thomas found it by touch, loosened the screws with tools he always carried, and carefully removed it. One by one, we crawled through the narrow duct, swallowing dust, feeling the cold metal against our elbows. The tunnel opened into a small technical room in the basement, adjacent to the server room. On the other side of a metal door, a faint hum of fans marked the heartbeat of the house's brain. We entered. Rows of servers blinked with green and blue lights. It was the heart of the beast. I connected the laptop to one of the panels. In seconds, the network opened up before me like a 3-dimensional map. I was no longer just a ghost. I was practically the owner of the place. "Listen, Thomas," I said. "In this tower, there's an emergency satellite link for David to communicate with his clients and partners without relying on the normal network. I'm going to reconfigure it. On the desktop, there's a program called Total Broadcast. When I say now, you'll press the red button. That will send the camera footage not to his contacts, but to dozens of email addresses of journalists, activists, and organizations that this other guy pre-programmed. It will take courage to face what comes next, but at least the world will know the truth." Thomas swallowed but nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Before we separated, I took a deep breath. I couldn't stay down there. If I wanted to break the script, I had to get on the main stage. From the console, I discreetly activated the microphones and speakers in the living room and the observation room. Then I looked at Thomas. "I'm going upstairs. As soon as you hear my signal, don't hesitate." I left through another service door and went up a narrow set of stairs. Suddenly, the hallways that had seemed elegant hours before felt like the entrails of a cruel machine. I reached the living room. It was empty. The table was cleared of dinner. Everything was impeccable, as if nothing had happened. However, through the glass wall, I saw movement. In the hidden room, behind the sliding wall, Several men and women in white porcelain masks were settling into leather armchairs. Some masks had a soft smile, others neutral or sad expressions, all equally unsettling. They were dressed in formal attire, with expensive suits and discreet jewelry. They had prepared for a refined evening. I was the entertainment. On another camera feed I saw on an auxiliary screen on the wall, David was giving instructions to his guards. He divided the team into two groups, one to search the rooms, the other to watch the entrances. Sooner or later, he would come down to the basement, and then he would realize someone had touched his toy. I needed him to come to me in the living room. I needed to face him. First, however, I decided to deal with his audience. From the server, I had programmed a very specific sound, the same deep hum I had heard alone in the house, amplified and tuned to resonate in the observation room. I activated it softly at first, barely perceptible. I saw some of the masked figures frown, shift in their seats. I increased the intensity slightly, then added another layer. Using the laptop's recorder, I had captured the most terrifying phrase from Arthur's diary. I took that recording, distorted it into an almost unrecognizable, genderless, whispering voice, and fragmented it into small pieces. From the hidden speakers in the room, I began to project these fragments randomly at different heights and directions. Harvesting fear, a funnel of terror. They're coming for my children. The words slithered among them like snakes, appearing behind their necks, in their ears, from the ceiling. I saw them grow restless. Some stood up, looked around, touched their ears. Others looked towards the glass, expecting David to do something. From the living room, he couldn't hear those whispers. He only saw his guests losing their composure. He touched his earpiece, spoke sharply to the technical team. With a bitter smile, I listened to his complaint through the communication system I now also controlled. "What the hell is going on in the observation room?" he growled. "Get rid of that noise right now." The technicians, locked in an upstairs room, checked their panels but found nothing, because I wasn't touching their controls. I was intervening directly in an audio channel that no one else knew existed. That was the perfect moment. I isolated David's communication line, left all other channels intact, and in his earpiece, I projected a single whispered phrase in a chilling voice I didn't recognize as my own. "Tonight's offering has been rejected." I saw him stop in his tracks, his shoulders tensed, his expression changed, his eyes, always so confident, widened. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in them. Not fear of me, but fear of something beyond his control. The facade shattered, the perfect host vanished. What remained was the predator, his pride wounded. "Lock it down," he roared into the communicator. "Alpha team, search the upper floor, room by room. Bravo team, with me to the control room. There's a rat in my system. I want it dead." From the server, I watched the movements of both teams on the cameras. Alpha Team was moving down the long first-floor hallway, armed and in formation. When they were all in a straight line, I smiled sadly. With a couple of commands, I activated the security sprinklers in that hallway. Instead of water, they sprayed a dense cleaning foam designed for cleaning bots, which made the marble floor as slick as an ice rink. The four men slipped and fell on top of each other, their weapons sliding across the floor. At the same time, I switched the lights to strobe mode and activated a piercing alarm. The hallway turned into a sensory hell. Blinded and disoriented, it would take them a while to get up if they managed to at all. Meanwhile, David and Bravo team reached the control room. I had already locked the door electronically. They kicked it down, only to find an empty room and panels full of flashing, unresponsive lights. The local system was limited. The real control had been moved to the basement. David got the message. "She's downstairs," he spat, gritting his teeth. "In the server room." It was exactly what I wanted. I went back to the living room and stood in the center, facing the window. On the other side, The guests behind the glass were huddled together, restless, some already on their feet. Several were clutching their masks as if they had suddenly become heavy. They were afraid. For the first time, their own fear had entered the scene. I heard footsteps in the hallway. David appeared in the living room doorway, his shirt stained with sweat, his face contorted. He stopped when he saw me there, waiting for him, not hiding. The silence between us was thick. We were not husband and wife in a domestic dispute. We were hunter and prey, though the roles were starting to blur. "Lucy," he said, his voice strangely calm, "the game is over. Surrender now, and maybe this will end quickly." I let out a short, dry laugh. "You're mistaken, David," I replied. "Your game ended the moment I stepped onto this stage of my own free will. Your ritual failed. This time, the offering decided to fight back." A flash of fury crossed his eyes. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled. "There are forces here you can't comprehend." "I comprehend enough," I retorted. "I comprehend that you and those sitting back there are a bunch of sick cowards hiding behind money and masks. I comprehend that you've been feeding this place with the blood and fear of innocence for years. And I comprehend that this time you're the ones who are going to be judged." He lunged at me, not waiting for more words. The distance between us closed in seconds. He was stronger, faster, better trained. I only had my determination and my knowledge of the house. The instant he charged, I screamed with all my might. "Now, Thomas!" My voice, captured by the hidden microphones, echoed throughout the house. In the basement, Thomas pressed the red button on the laptop screen. The satellite link activated. A torrent of data began to stream out of that mansion to the outside world. Simultaneously, I pressed a small remote I had in my pocket. In the observation room, steel shutters crashed down from the ceiling, sealing the glass wall with a deafening clang. The guests were trapped in their own dark safe. Their pounding and screams filtered through as a distant echo into the living room. As David hesitated for a second, startled by the noise, I sidestepped his path, and he stumbled over a low coffee table. I used his imbalance to run to one of the control panels in the living room and change the configuration of the movable walls. Panels he had designed as part of the game rose from the floor, creating temporary barriers that disoriented him. On the cameras, now reconnected to the outside world, everything was being recorded. Chaos in the hallways, the bodyguards slipping, the guests pounding on the walls, David chasing me through his own house, which had become a labyrinth. At first, the video reached only a few inboxes: investigative journalists, human rights NGOs, activists. But it only took a few of them to open it and start sharing for the broadcast to go viral. It had no narrator or commentary, just the title the mysterious hacker had pre-configured: The House of Offerings, an elite human hunt. Share this. Millions of people, unknowingly at first, began to watch. They saw the masks, they saw the weapons, they saw David's face twisted with rage. They saw mine, stained with tears and sweat, but resolute. Above all, they saw that this was not a movie. It was too raw, too clumsy, too real. Inside the house, phones began to vibrate incessantly. The guards' phones, the guests' phones, David's own phone were flooded with notifications, calls, messages. "What is this? Is that you? Turn it off immediately. It's on every channel." David paused his pursuit for a moment to look at his device. His face contorted into a mask of disbelief and horror. For the first time, he understood that he no longer controlled the narrative. And then, in the distance, sirens could be heard. First one, then several, approaching rapidly along the only road that led to that place. The GPS coordinates embedded in the house's system, now at the service of my signal, had guided the police directly to the door. The rest was a blurry mix of orders, shouts, flashing blue lights, boots storming through the front door. I saw David fall to his knees, exhausted, disarmed more by reality than by force. As the officers handcuffed him, The cameras kept recording. The journalists arriving at the scene connected their own live streams. The world watched as the guests were brought out one by one from the sealed room, their masks ripped off in front of the floodlights. Well-known judges, politicians, CEOs of major corporations, names people associated with success, stability, respect. There they were, trembling, pale, reduced to what they had always been. Vulnerable humans trapped by their own monstrosity. Months passed. Months of interrogations, media-frenzied trials, newspaper headlines. The case of the House of Offerings became the biggest scandal of our generation. Governments teetered, companies collapsed, careers were ruined. I testified in court, my voice breaking but never wavering from the story. David in the dock was a shadow of the man I had known. His charm was gone. His eyes, once so confident, were empty. He was sentenced, along with his associates, to life in a maximum security prison. The state confiscated properties, accounts, investments. Part of that money was allocated to a special fund for victims and their families. A considerable amount came to my name, enough to start over anywhere in the world, change my identity, erase all traces of that story, and pretend it never happened. Many people advised me to do just that. Go far away, they said. Never set foot in that forest again. Leave it behind. But every time I closed my eyes, I didn't just see what they did to me. I saw the invisible faces of those who never got the chance to tell their story. I saw the symbol carved into the bark, waiting for the next victim. I understood that if I left and abandoned that land, it would still belong to them, even with the sect in prison. The place would remain charged with fear, silence, broken memory. So I made a decision many called insane. I used most of the money to buy the entire estate, including the house. Thomas was the only one who wasn't surprised. When I told him, he simply nodded as if he had always known it would end this way. "It's what your steps have been saying since that night," he murmured. "What's wrong here isn't just the people, it's what's been done to the land." The first thing I did was hire a demolition crew. I didn't want them to renovate or clean the house. I ordered it to be torn down completely, every wall, every foundation, every wire. I was present every day, watching the living room turn to rubble, the observation room crumble to pieces, the basement fill with dust. With each blow of the machinery, I felt a part of the weight I carried become slightly lighter. Once nothing was left standing, the real work began. Together with Thomas, neighbors from nearby towns, volunteers, environmental organizations, and families of victims who had been identified, we began to plant shrubs, flowers, young pines, oaks, fruit trees. Tree after tree, day after day, our hands filled with soil, our nails with dirt. The ground that had been the stage for so much horror began to receive seeds, water, care. On the exact spot where the main living room had stood, we didn't erect a statue or a stone monument. We planted a single tree, a large, sturdy ficus with strong roots and a wide canopy. We wanted it to become a living sanctuary over time, not a cold plaque commemorating pain. The years passed. 15 years can be an eternity, and at the same time, a whisper. It's long enough for a sapling to become a shade-giving tree, but not so long that the scars stop aching when the weather changes. That afternoon, I was sitting on a wooden bench under the leafy canopy of that ficus. The sun was beginning to set, filtering through the leaves in golden hues. Beside me, Thomas, now completely gray-haired, sipped tea from an old thermos. In front of us stretched the park we had created, the Forest of Hope. Children ran among the trees. Families walked along the paths. Couples took photos by the viewpoints. The shouts we heard were of joy, not terror. "That girl keeps looking at you," Thomas murmured, a half-smile on his face. I followed his gaze. A young woman with a backpack and a notebook was watching us from a nearby bench. Her expression was a mix of respect, curiosity, and a certain shyness. I recognized that look, the look of someone who had read too much about you without actually knowing you. After a while, the young woman stood up and approached nervously. "Excuse me, are you Lucy?" she asked timidly. "I'm a journalism student. I'm doing my final project on how the media can uncover hidden networks of power. Your case is one of the main ones I'm studying. Could I ask you a few questions?" Life had taught me to be wary of cameras, but also to understand the value of certain stories. I smiled slightly. 15 minutes, I replied. And no recording my voice, just take notes. She nodded gratefully and sat on the grass in front of us. Her initial questions were the usual ones. How had I survived? What was it like to testify at the trial? Did I still have nightmares? I answered honestly, without dwelling on the pain. I told her about therapy, about the sleepless nights, about the days when the sound of a closing door would, for a second, take me back to the living room of that house. I told her that healing wasn't a straight line upward, but a path full of ups and downs, of steps forward and steps back. Many people in your place would have gone far away, she said at one point. But you stayed, bought the land, and built a park. Why? I looked at the tree under which we were sitting. Its roots spread beneath our feet, invisible but present. Because running away would have meant letting the place continue to belong to them, I replied. Trauma is like a poisoned root. You can cut the branches, but if you leave the root buried, sooner or later, it will sprout again. I needed to do the opposite, to pull out that root and plant something new on top of it. I told her about the first plantings, how as we dug holes for the trees, some volunteers would cry silently. How with each tree, the names of victims, real or symbolic, were spoken, as if each trunk were a small victory over the darkness. I told her how Thomas, who once lived shrunken by fear, had become a kind of grandfather of the park, telling stories of birds and plants to the children who came on field trips. The student turned a few pages, took a deep breath, and carefully asked the question that many before her had asked. Have you been able to forgive David? I fell silent. The wind blew softly, rustling the leaves of the ficus. In the distance, the murmur of a fountain could be heard. I have stopped hating him, I said finally. Hate is a poison you drink hoping the other person will die. For a while, I lived poisoned. One day, I just got tired of it. But forgiving what he did? No. There are acts that can't be erased with an I forgive you. What I do accept is that he no longer has power over me. That is enough. I knew from sporadic news reports, which I didn't seek out but sometimes reached me, that David was locked in a white cement cell in a maximum security prison, that he had tried to manipulate, seduce, and negotiate without success. His charms were useless within walls that treated everyone the same. The last psychological report I read described him as a defeated man, without projects, without devotion to anything. He had bet his soul on the idea of absolute power and had lost everything. He is trapped in a lifeless concrete box, I added. I am here, surrounded by trees, children, and light. I don't need any more symbolic justice than that. The young woman nodded, her eyes shining. One last question, she said. After everything, what do you think is the most important thing you've learned? I was quiet for a few seconds, looking at the landscape, the pines, the ficus, the laughter, the sky turning orange. That darkness is real, I finally answered. That evil exists, and sometimes it wears an expensive suit and a perfect smile. But I've also learned that a single light, lit in the right place, can set an entire forest of shadows on fire and reduce it to ashes. And on those ashes, you can always plant something new. I looked at her directly. That's why I don't want people to just remember the story of the monster, I continued. Monsters sooner or later fall and are forgotten. What really matters is the garden that grows afterward. That's where the hope is. The student carefully closed her notebook. Thank you, really, she whispered. Not just for the interview, but for this. She stood up, gave us a slight bow, and walked away, taking with her in her notebook something more than just facts. She was taking a different way of looking at scars. The sun was now touching the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. From the nearby town, the evening church bells began to chime, a melody inviting quiet reflection. Thomas and I sat in silence, sharing that calm without needing to say anything. 15 years ago, this same piece of land had been a stage for horror. That night, I thought my life would end there. But it didn't. I kept breathing, kept walking, kept planting. And with the strength of new roots, I turned my own hell into a place where others could find peace. David, with his perfect smile, had promised me a new beginning in that house. It took me a long time to understand, but in the end, I got just that, in my own way. Not in a glass mansion, but in a forest full of life. Not as prey in someone else's game, but as the woman who decided to plant a garden on the grave of her fears. If you've made it this far, I want you to leave the word hope in the comments. That way, I'll know you listened to this story until the end. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that even after fear, you can always start again.